Glasses on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's really lovely to be here, and had such a lovely warm welcome as well. And thank you for those songs as well. Rob asked me if there were any songs that I particularly wanted, and it's really a blessing to have all three of them, really. And they mean a lot to me because they say exactly what I want to say about being compassionate. And compassion is it's not just about saying, oh dear, I'm really sorry, or commiserating. It's about putting yourself in someone's shoes. It's about really empathising with them, really feeling for them, even if you're not going through the same thing yourself. But it's having that understanding, and we do that in partnership with God. And that's really important to remember. So the text I chose this morning is entitled Generosity Encouraged. And I chose it. It was one I read a little while ago. I was doing a Lent study. I think it was a Tear Fund one. And it could have come from any Christian charity, but it was Tear Fund. And as we know, Christian charities, and it's been mentioned already, are pleading for help. They're always pleading for help. There's always desperation all over the world, in this country as well as countries overseas as well. But it does speak to us, doesn't it? And also I chose it because it was about generosity, and your church is generous. It's generous to compassion, generous to children around the world. And so I thought that was appropriate as well. And Paul is addressing the question of the collection of money for the distressed Christians in Jerusalem, which the Corinthians had started but not completed. And he talks about the joy and the grace of giving on the part of believers that is more than matched by the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. He talks to them about the Macedonian Christians who, out of joy and out of their extreme poverty, extreme generosity welled up, as so often happens. And they had given as much as they were able, and even beyond that. Maybe it wasn't a great amount. That didn't matter. It was what they wanted, their heart told them to give, what they felt they should give. He goes on to say that although he is not commanding them, he wants to test the sincerity of their love for Christ by comparing it with the earnestness of others. And he cites Christ himself, who had riches but became poor, so that through poverty he might become rich. And Paul wants generosity and spontaneous giving. And he urges the Corinthians to finish what they have started. And then comes the last two verses. Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn, their plenty will supply what you need. Then there will be equality. So, not to give more than they could manage, but if they had surplus, to give that to those that did not have, and then maybe the tables would be turned at some point and it would be the other way. And what Paul says is the willingness, which is the motive for true generosity, no matter how small the amount that can be afforded, and this will be a striving for equality. And his words reminded me, as it may do you, of the widow's mite, the widow who gave just what she had, a small coin, but she gave it out of her poverty so that she might become rich. So what am I saying to you as a congregation this morning? I'm not a theologian, I'm not really a preacher, I'm a talker, but I am someone who wants to advocate on behalf of children living in poverty. And they have no voice. Very often they have no voice. And it says in Proverbs 31, verses 8 to 9, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. For for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and defend the rights of the poor and needy. Poverty is not God's plan. We are. And thanks to sponsors, God is using his church to transform the lives of people living in poverty all over the world. Poverty is injustice, and compassion offers hope and restoration to children, their families and their communities. So it goes some way to righting the injustice of poverty, those having more than they need and those not having enough for their needs. So let me tell you a little bit about my story and my sponsorship. I started sponsoring in 2010. I was a little girl of 9 in Guatemala, and she was sort of chosen for me. I was at a Christian festival, Spring Harvest, down in, I think it was Minehead. And I wanted to sponsor. I'd heard a talk. I think my daughter at that time sponsored. My son may have sponsored then too. We were in fact speaking about his sponsorship yesterday. And this was after a time I had had some financial difficulty, quite big financial difficulty, but someone, a Christian friend, ensured that I didn't lose my home. And if you like, that person had riches. They could afford to help me. And they were spontaneously generous. And their plenty supplied what I needed. And thankfully the problems were resolved, and I paid back what I owed. And I wanted, therefore, to change the life, the path of somebody who needed my help. And so God called me to sponsor a child. And she graduated a couple of years ago, and I'm now sponsoring more children. It just comes about. You just feel the need to sponsor another child, and then maybe, if you can, another one. I find it very hard to resist. And it is a real privilege. I feel it's a privilege. I feel that it's such a lovely thing that I'm able to do. So I'm here this morning to thank you for your generosity and your willingness and financial sacrifice in sponsoring 15 lovely children. And it is amazing. And I hope that your sponsorship brings you real joy. So perhaps, Chris, you can put there they are. Now you can't see their faces that clearly because the pictures are quite small, but I don't know if you sponsor, maybe you can see your child up there. Your church has got this PowerPoint, so you can always go and have a look if you want a closer picture. But there are their faces. These are the children that you support and that we are thinking about this morning, and that you pray for, and that you have in your hearts. So it's 15 lives that have been transformed. And I have to be honest with you, one of the reasons I'm here this morning, yes, is to thank you as a church for supporting these children. But I want more children to be sponsored. And I want you to continue the work, if you like, that you've started. I want you to be able to continue sponsoring these children. Sometimes it isn't possible. Sometimes people say to me, I did sponsor a child, but I went through a difficulty, I couldn't do it anymore. What happened? And of course what happens is they get sponsored by somebody else, but they don't have to leave their project. They're not turned out. It doesn't happen like that. They are looked after. And sometimes they do get re-sponsored. I sponsored a girl who was 18, and I suspect maybe her sponsor couldn't do that anymore. And so she graduated at 21. So I managed to help her for 3 years, following on from the help of somebody else. Let me tell you a little bit about these children. So there's 15, as I said, 11 girls and 4 boys. And they live in countries all over the world. It really is a worldwide thing. Indonesia, I think there's 7 children in Indonesia, 2 in Bolivia, others in Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Kenya, Brazil and Ecuador. And 10 are at primary school and 5 are at secondary school. So I don't know how long you've sponsored some of them for. Maybe you've seen them from primary through to secondary. I don't know, but you know. And there's a few statistics I want to share with you. We always like statistics, just gives you a little bit of encouragement. So, Chris, perhaps you could put the next slide. Oh, you have. It's very quick. So, you can see there, well over 11,000 hours the children have spent in their projects since sponsorship began. That's collectively. So, time at the project, which they go to maybe once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week. Sometimes they might go after school, particularly if they need help with schoolwork. Or if they're coming to the end of their time at the project, or maybe they're helping some of the younger children. So it's 11,000 hours when they are being helped, when they've got a safe place, a familiar place, a place where they are embraced. And they've had nearly 4,000 nutritious meals. I suspect it's a bit more now, because this slide was put together 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the information comes obviously from the project. Nutritious meals, eating the local food, but having enough protein, enough vitamins and minerals, the things that we would expect children need to grow healthy. 65 medical checkups, so it could be vaccinations, could be checks to, children all over the world have NIPS, don't they? So maybe it's that. But checkups to make sure they're healthy, or as interventions if they're not. And sometimes, they need hospital treatment. Sometimes somebody in the family needs hospital treatment, and that is something that's provided. They've also received 19 Bibles. Now, clever amongst you will work out that's more than the number of children, and the reason for that is that as they get a bit older, they get a more age-appropriate Bible. And it's something that they can take home, that they can use, and maybe the family use. The children have received well over £8,000 in financial support. And they've also been sent 17 additional gifts. Now, this financial support is your sponsorship money, okay? And that goes to the project. A very, very high proportion of it goes to help that particular child. Very often the children can go to the project, but it provides all the extra things that they need. And also gifts. Now, I don't know about you, what kind of gifts you send. We can't send physical gifts, but we can send gifts of money. And often these children will then buy something, or if they're young, then the project will buy something for them in discussion maybe with the family. And I've certainly been sent pictures of a child holding some shoes, a school bag. Not toys necessarily, like our children might expect, but things that they need. Not things that they want, but things that they need. And my favourite picture was of my little girl when she was a bit older, Loida in Guatemala, with a picture of a cupboard. And it was a cupboard that she bought with money I'd sent, and it was to put my letters in. And that was just lovely. And her things in. She was quite a big family, so to have a space of her own to put her things in. And there was her mother and her really smiling to send me this picture. And sometimes it may be the first gift they've ever received for a birthday. And it's really special. Just imagine their joy of having something special that's theirs. And then the other thing is the important thing which makes Compassion stand out from some of the other sponsorship charities is letters. And these letters are just such an important part. And you can see the statistics here, 55 letters sent by children, 32 sent by sponsors. And I know it's not always easy to get around to writing a letter. I have to leave myself a note, and sometimes, often when I've done a talk, I will go home and I will think, yes, I'll write to my children. And you can do it online, or you can send a paper letter. Sometimes it's quite nice, and I love receiving the letters. It's an important part of building up a relationship with that child, and it's difficult when they're 2 or 3. Obviously that's not easy, is it? But the parent maybe will appreciate it, and of course there's a translation. I like those little letters where they just tick boxes and the kind of house they live in or the kind of food they like. But if you haven't experienced a child getting older and then giving you more information, that's a joy to come. Sometimes they don't, but certainly sometimes they do, and they really start to give you bits of information, and you can feel that you're getting a bit more of a response. It's not always easy. I find sometimes the questions don't get answered, and I think there's set times for letter writing at the projects, and maybe the letter isn't available, or they can't remember, or they just, you know what children are like. But it is lovely, and it shows them that someone is really caring about them, someone's thinking about them, and can offer encouragement in their studies or in their relationships. And they provide that real emotional support that sometimes children don't get from their family at home. And there's plenty of tips online about letter writing. If you're unsure, go onto the Compassion app or the website and you'll find some good tips about letter writing. And I like to send pictures, a photo of my grandchildren, picture of the garden when it's snowy, picture of the garden when the daffodils are out. It's just that kind of thing. Sometimes people say, well, I don't really want to say too much because I have so much. Yes, that's true, and you don't want to talk about wealth. You wouldn't want to do that, but if you've been on somewhere on holiday, they will want to know. Maybe they'll go and look it up on a map. They want to know what your life is like. They're interested. And so, you know, it is possible to write something, and it doesn't have to be long. I know sometimes it says, you know, you can write 5,000 characters. You don't have to. It's not important. It's just receiving the letter. So I want to say, the next slide just really says, I think, thank you. Yeah, it does. Because you're making an incredible difference to children living in poverty. So a little bit more about compassion. Compassion's model is to take a child, each child, and offer them individual sponsorship. It's a way of lifting them out of poverty and giving them hope and a future. And they do this in partnership with 27 countries, churches in 27 countries. And those churches are not chosen randomly, they're chosen particularly because they have a heart for children in their community. And they know what the needs are, they can focus appropriate help. And they can't take all the children in, but they know the ones that are in most need. And sometimes the families choose which child goes to the project. You know, sometimes people say, well, isn't it a bit unfair? You know, not all the children in the family can go, but you have to remember that they're supporting the family as well. And sometimes they choose the youngest child because they're going to get the most help. But it could be an older one that then comes back home and helps to teach the younger ones. And compassion has a holistic approach, looking after the physical and health needs of the child, as well as the spiritual, ensuring each child is valued and loved, that their nutritional and emotional needs are met, that they are supported and nurtured as they grow, and obviously most importantly, they learn to love Jesus Christ as their Saviour. And sponsors play a part in this as well, as I've said, not just in monetary terms, but through the letters that you write, offering encouragement, sharing faith, maybe a Bible verse or something you felt touched your heart at your church service. And that is so important. God has a heart for the poor. We know that. Yet through your sponsorship, you too have a heart for the poor. When we refresh and bless others through our giving, we are ourselves blessed and refreshed. And I just love receiving the letters, as I say, from children, telling me about their hopes, what they want to be when they grow up, which often changes, doesn't it? Children change their minds. And I love hearing about their friendships. So I sometimes say, well, who are your friends? I'll pray for them as well, and then I try and say their names in the next letter back, so that they know that I've really taken on board what they've told me. And it's just a joy to be connected. And it is amazing how often a letter arrives, either paper or, as it used to be, or in my inbox. And maybe I've been feeling a bit down or depressed, things haven't gone very well. And I do indeed feel refreshed. The letter puts a smile on my face, and particularly if they've got one of their quirky drawings. I don't know about you, but they do some drawings of some strange things. I think sometimes they're at their project and they're told to put a picture in, and they look up and they see something and they draw a picture of it. And I just love that, because they're just like children everywhere. So God cares about the one sheep, the one blind man, the one with leprosy, the one woman who touched his cloak for healing. And these are the words of a sponsored child called Richmond. And I don't know, we've got one young person over there. I don't know whether you are Dorothea or Abigail. Abigail. Hello, Abigail. So I'm going to tell you about a little boy. He's not a little boy anymore, but he was a little boy. It's not the one in your story there, but he's called Richmond. And he was telling his story and relating the transformational difference of sponsorship. And he grew up in the slums of Uganda, which is a country in Africa. And slums, really poor houses, just made of mud, maybe with a wooden roof or just tin roof, and no running water. Not really like the home you might have. And his father died when he was young, and he was forced to beg on the streets, which meant he had to go out and beg people for money. And he was only little, probably younger than you. And he believed he didn't matter. He just thought nobody bothered about him. Nobody cared for him. He thought that no one even knew his name, which they probably didn't. And, we think about how would you feel if you knew that child and that was the situation. But the thing is, God our Father knows all our names, and he has plans for each of us. He knows the names of the children you sponsor. He knows the names of all the other children that are sponsored, and he knows the names of those that have not got a sponsor. And God had big plans for Richmond. In the Bible, Jesus called the fishermen by name. Simon and his brother Andrew, James and his brother John. He had big plans for them. He wanted to teach them. He wanted to prepare them to go out and share the good news. He challenged them. And his teaching and power transformed their lives. And Jesus calls us to be a part of his plan in the world, despite our flaws and failings. So what happened to Richmond? What happened to Richmond? This child who would often go days without any food. He was sponsored. He got a sponsor through compassion. And he went to a project because somebody laid his name upon somebody's heart. God laid his name upon somebody's heart. And they sponsored him, and it made a difference. And he's now grown up. I don't know what age he is, but I think he's probably in his 40s. But he now runs a ministry that equips pastors all over Africa. And he was in the UK recently, and I didn't get to meet him because I couldn't actually go to that particular conference, but I have heard him speak online. And he is amazing. So God's kingdom works one at a time, as I said, saving people one at a time, and then rejoicing. And world poverty is an overwhelming issue. It's been referred to this morning. And we can't see how to battle it, or to solve it, or even how to work together to solve it. And we can easily become disengaged. We see stuff on the television and we just can't cope with it. But we have to remember each compassion child has a name, has a face, and is an individual. And God's kingdom model shows us how to tackle poverty and helplessness one child at a time. We can send a child to school. We can make sure that child has a good meal while we figure out how to eradicate poverty. And we can do this for £32 a month, which is just around about £1.07 a day. And it doesn't sound too bad like that, does it? £1.07 a day. If you put it together, £32 could be a big chunk of an income. A pound coin doesn't go very far in this country, but it goes a long way in some of these other developing countries. And I realise that this is a big ask, to come here and say, well, I'd actually like more sponsors. And it can leave a bit of a hole. It can feel difficult to do that. And God doesn't want us to give if we really can't manage it. He's not asking us to do that. So it may be it's too big an ask at this time. And God knows that. But what we can do is pray about it. We can pray for these children that somebody comes forward to sponsor them. Or that we might be in a position later on to do that. I know that when I first heard my daughter was sponsoring, I think she just started work and she wanted to do that. I wasn't in the position at that time, but once I was, then I remembered and I wanted to sponsor. So I was lucky enough to hear the testimony of a Compassion graduate recently. Her name is Damaris and she's 40 years old. And she said that being sponsored as a child meant that she became empowered and was given hope, and that she came to know that God loved her. She said that love in action brings hope and is akin, and I love this phrase, to someone holding someone's hand. A sponsor can offer discipleship and walk with them on their journey, or be part of that support group along with the project. And Compassion graduates often then offer a hand to someone else so that there is a ripple effect and it spreads out in the family, in the community, in the village, and even beyond that. So, I have with me today some child profiles there on the table over there. And they've been especially chosen for this congregation. They're not just random. Someone's put some thought into looking at the church, looking at who's sponsored already. So they're just a snapshot, if you like. 5 children. And even if you can't decide this morning, but you think you might want to sponsor, Compassion can still be contacted and you can take the child's name down. I can't let you have the profile unless you actually sponsor, but you can contact Compassion. Or maybe you'll hear another talk, or you'll see something on a programme, or you'll come across something when you're searching online, I don't know, and you'll think about it. And please come and smile back at these solemn little faces. They face a camera. Sometimes they haven't ever faced a camera before. It's quite a difficult thing for them to cope with. So I've got Coward, 18, who lives in Thailand. And maybe somebody might like to sponsor him because he doesn't probably need sponsoring for more than a couple of years, maybe 3. There's Deborah, who's 5, and she lives in Burkina Faso. And her hobbies are dancing and dolls, and she has 4 siblings. And then there's another one who, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it's Jemtukuna, 9, in Togo. And she also enjoys dancing and ball games and is in the equivalent of year 4. And then there's Priya, 6, who I thought was a little girl, but she's a little boy. And she likes art and drawing. And then there's Maya, who's 2. And she lives in Colombia. And she and her mother receive assistance from trained specialists based at her local church. And they visit the home and give nutritional and medical care. She's too young to go to the project, but she still gets that input. And they help her mother with early child development. So please consider sponsoring these children and releasing them from the life of poverty. So unsponsored, these children may lead a broken life and an unknown tomorrow. A life with no direction, a struggle just to live, a life of injustice. And I think the thing about poverty is that it can make a child or a young person just feel useless. And especially if these days they do have access to social media, they do see how other people live. And I don't think it's that they want to have that lifestyle necessarily, but they just don't have anything really. And it, of course, can lead to a life of crime, or they're living on the streets. And, you know, many churches might preach the gospel and God's love, but it is important to take action, as you yourselves are. And the churches with whom Compassion partners holds the hands of these children and their carers as they spend time at the church and the project. So again, I ask, can you hold a child's hand and be the hands and feet of Jesus, who wraps his arms around each of us? Now I just want to, I've spoken quite a lot, so sorry about that, but I want to just show a brief video, and it's called Let's Meet Violet. Now, this video, I've met the couple who went, I've met them on Zoom. We all say these days, don't we? We haven't actually met somebody, we've met them on Zoom. But over a period of 4 weeks, I met them on Zoom. It was a compassion forum for speakers. And they actually got to do this visit, and they met their child, and it was amazing. And so I'm showing the video, not because I'm promoting visiting, that is not something that most people, sponsors can do, but it's because it shows you so clearly the difference that compassion makes to a child, and encourages you that you are sponsoring, and this is what it's all about, because it's a two-way thing. So enjoy.
I believe it's all about the one. If we can make a difference in one person's life, then who knows what that can lead to.
We take so much for granted in the Western world, and you know, when you visit a compassion child and you see firsthand, you realise what is important.
We're not able to see our compassion girls grow. We have photographs of them. Those photographs are side by side with our own daughters and our grandchildren.
Violet was quite little, and now she's 14 and growing up fast, so it's going to be quite exciting to actually see her in person.
This is, for us, a dream come true, to visit the girl that has been in our prayers, on our hearts, in our thoughts, for 11 years.
When the family gets a visit, it is actually a blessing. The child meets the sponsor, and the child can never imagine I'll ever see this person physically, apart from photos and communication in letters. But when there's this sponsor coming physically, wow, it's just breathtaking, and it's a blessing to families.
When we were maybe 50 metres away, we could hear them. The windows were up, but we could still hear them singing their hearts out. She appeared out of nowhere. I didn't see her coming, but she just threw herself at me. And I don't think I will ever forget that moment. It was like we'd known each other ever since she was born, and that we'd been apart for so long.
You're not just sponsoring some random person who you never know anything about. Each child is known by somebody. They are cared for, they are looked after.
I think about the staff, how passionate they are to see these kids thrive and flourish.
We want to add value on these children's lives. That means economically, spiritually, they know what to do.
We only play a small part, but to see the day-to-day running of the project that provides hope, Violet, I will always remember that and remind myself that she's being cared for.
Looking at each person on that photograph that plays a part in Violet's life, and I think that's the thing that struck me. You know, it's not just us. Each member of staff plays a part in making sure she thrives, making sure she reaches her full potential, and that's what really struck me. It will really be treasured.
I realise that I can't change the world, but I know Linda and I can make a difference in more children's lives. The only thing that I know for sure is that our lives are not going to be the same again.
I just love that video. I've watched it so many times, and just when she comes running to the car and greets her sponsors, and it is a real privilege. And obviously it's not easy to go and visit your sponsored child, but it just shows you the difference that they made to her life. And I think you just have to, we can imagine, can't we, these children and their projects. And this week I received some updates about the children I sponsored their projects. There were some pictures. And I think probably if you sponsor, you will get some as well. You just go to the page where the letters page, I think, and it says news from your project. And they're just photographs, but I felt it was wonderful just to see them sitting there writing their letters, playing their games, that kind of thing. Just doing what children do, but with a future ahead of them. And sometimes it can be a great future. Well, it's always a great future. But they will go on to make a difference. So there are some prayers that we can think about, that we need to pray for God's protection on all the projects all over the world. Sometimes the projects are in difficult places. I think that Compassion don't choose to set up a project where it's likely that they could be impacted by problems, but there are children in Haiti who are sponsored. I sponsored a child in Haiti, but she lived in the hill country, not near Port-au-Prince, but there are problems sometimes. So we do need to pray for protection of these children and their the projects and the pastors and all the people that work there. And we need to pray for God's wisdom to be given to governments and leaders in countries, that they govern well and that they don't cause harm to come to these children who are perhaps just setting off on their life's journey. We need to pray for these countries. And we need to pray for the project partners, for the churches who do all this good work, the people that day in, day out look after these children, provide that care and nurture for the most vulnerable in the society. So I return to the reading that we had this morning. There is a joy in giving and in speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And I hope that, as I said, those who sponsor already have that joy. And if you can, please, continue sponsoring. And if I've touched your heart this morning, or these children have touched your heart, God has touched your heart, it's not about me, it's about God, it's about His guiding. But if I've sparked a tiny flame, then please think about sponsoring. Or in the future, think about sponsoring when you're able. And please do come and speak to me this morning. Come and look at their pictures. Come and ask your questions. I'll try and answer them. But I do thank you so much for allowing me to come this morning, and I thank God for His guidance that I was able to come and speak. So thank you very much indeed.